I don't know if it's specific workouts or specific trends, especially with social media and these physical health influencers, promoting all these 15 minutes lose body fat, or in 30 days get all these challenges to get fit. I think it's great that exercise has become mainstream conversation, but something that interests and also concerns me is that, is there a certain exercise that suits everyone, or how does someone find something that works for them? Because someone, say, from like the subcontinent like me, doesn't have the same the skeletal framework, doesn't have the same muscle tone, doesn't even have the same cardiovascular system as someone from, say, Europe. So if I go do something really intense, like I listen to Andrew Huberman, and I say I'm going to do a cold plunge, then I'm going to do a 90-minute exercise which is really heavy and intense, it might feel good once or twice, but I don't know, is the wear and tear a lot more on the body for someone? Or how does that kind of matching the exercise to the person or to the population work out?
Yeah, so you've touched on a lot of themes there, so I'm going to try and circle back and catch them all. So
Sure.
the first point you make, which is that in general, historically, physical activity was kind of in the was built into our workday,
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of talk about physical activity transitions, and that's the idea where we've gone from a society that relied very heavily on activities that involved manual labor and movement and so on, to a society that's more sedentary in our daily habits. So
Mm-hmm.
we've probably moved from that idea where physical activity is part of our day, to what is now more structured exercise. And there's an important distinction there, because in scientific terms they are different. Physical activity is kind of any movement that you do that raises your heart rate above resting.
Yeah.
Exercise then is structured physical activity with the goal of improving some component of fitness. So they're quite different if you think about it from a philosophical point of view. And it kind of then speaks to your point about the likes of the new trends on social media, or in different types of fitness teams that are emerging, where people are focused on very, very specific types of training to bring about somewhat specific goals. Sometimes it's around weight loss, sometimes it's around muscle growth, sometimes it's both. But they can be very, very different types of exercise under the broad terms of aerobic exercise, strength training, circuit training, all of these types of training.
Mm-hmm.
So to your question about whether there are better exercises for better people, you did mention two terms I'll come back to: biohacking. And certainly there seems to be this under that umbrella, I would place this idea of pursuing very extreme types of exercise as a means to achieve your goals.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem I see with that, and I think you were hinting at it, is that for someone who doesn't perform any exercise at all, and going back to my earlier point about beginning to do something
Yeah.
at all, sometimes what people who do no exercise at all might need to do is just to begin to walk for 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. They
Yeah.
don't need to be going into high intensity body weight exercise followed by a cold plunge followed by a sauna. It's kind of the people who are in that domain, they're people who are very experienced, I would say, with exercise already, have tried lots of different types of training, and now they're gravitating towards novel trends and so on. So there's that element that the message needs to be, on social media, where you're seeing people pursue many of these, I would say, extreme types of exercise and activities. That's not really for everyone.
Mm.
It's probably somewhere around 60 to 80% of the population on average across lots of different countries don't engage in any form of exercise. So
Wow.
really, they're the people that we probably want to target. They're the
Mm.
people we want to target in terms of getting them to be more active. Um,
That's a huge number,
and
60
then
to
so your
80%.
your other
Yeah.
yeah, oh no, it's very high, yeah. So then your other point about the right exercise for the right person, you mentioned a very important phrase, which is what works for them, and that's a message that we use a lot, which is that for many people starting out on their exercise journey, if they've never done much before, it is about finding the exercise that works best for them. And you mentioned a few different things like golf or badminton. Sports can be very useful because they involve other people, and there can be that accountability, there can be the buddy system and all the social enjoyment that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
And from the point of view of just getting the body moving and becoming more aerobically, and perhaps a little bit on the strength side, becoming more fit in that way, those sports serve a great purpose. I suppose where we get into the more specific side of things is if For example, you're dealing with someone who's 65 years of age, they're beginning to notice declines in their strength and their movement capabilities, and you want to intervene then with a very specific type of exercise training to improve strength, or to increase muscle size if someone has had a period of inactivity and they've lost a lot of muscle size. So there is that kind of balance to be struck between just having people involved in exercise in general because it's good for their health, versus very specific types of exercise to bring about some targeted change within their body. And again, the requirements in terms of, you know, expertise, in terms of support of physiotherapists or exercise scientists or fitness instructors, that does vary quite a bit depending on the person and the types of goals that they're after.
Mm. And, it's nice to hear what exercise does. I mean, the importance of exercise is clearly marked in studies, and various fields of study have highlighted how important it is physically and even mentally and cognitively, psychologically, what it does for your mood, etc. But maybe what does a sedentary lifestyle do to your body? Because someone in their 20s might not feel it right now, right? Because the bodies are resilient. They don't, the aches and pains, you don't think so. It's much easier to wake up in the morning and say, instead of even 5 minutes or 20 minutes on the cross trainer or treadmill, or even thinking, you know what, I'm young, I can handle it. I'm just going to have like a nice big piece of toast with Nutella on it, and it's much, much better, right? Because you got to be honest, sometimes waking up and getting that kind of that inertia to go out is a little hard. So you rather just, especially if you're in a cold country, a hot cup of coffee, that's nothing like it. But when you're in your 40s, then you start feeling a little bit of stiffness, and you know things take longer to recover. But what happens inside the body, like on a muscular level, to your entire system when there's inactivity? And it could be sitting on the sofa watching Netflix, could be sitting at a desk 10 hours a day, and maybe from a younger age, if you start this lifestyle versus someone who's active, what happens in the two scenarios?
Yeah, there are two great ways to think about this. So let's start with the physical inactivity piece. So one of the kind of axioms that we use nowadays is something like physical inactivity contributes to the increased risk of at least 35 different clinical conditions. So it's a really nice review. It's probably 15 years old at this stage, where there's this really nice picture of a human body. And what you see is lines coming out of pretty much every organ system and every part of the body that describe clinical conditions that are linked to physical inactivity.
Wow. Okay.
So there's one of the perils of my office is the rubbish bins just went by. But
that's fine.
So in the case of so like I'm saying, there's a huge number of clinical conditions where physical inactivity is seen to increase the risk. Now, this is slightly different to the idea that exercise can mitigate the risk, and so that will bring me to the other point that you mentioned about getting old and the effects that would have. But if we stick on the physical inactivity piece for a second, you ask what happens within the body, and let's use the muscular system as an example. So as we grow up and we mature in adolescence, there's a certain amount of what we could call functional capacity that we develop. And functional capacity can be things like the ability to climb stairs or to get up and down out of a chair. And if we take that, kind of extend that out further, so getting able to get up and down out of a chair could be one form of movement or functional capability. And to extend that to kind of elite performance, it would be the ability to put weight on your shoulders and do a squatting exercise, which is, a very similar movement. So you might find that someone might, someone in there, let's say in their 20s, if they do no activity whatsoever, maybe they can get up and down out of a chair 10 times without stopping, but then they feel fatigued. Whereas you could, for an athlete, for example, you could put a weight of twice their body weight on their shoulders, and they could do multiple repetitions of that exercise. So you see, for two people of the same age, you can see this massive range in terms of functional ability. Now, the reason that's important is because if we then think about how we progress throughout our age, from when people reach their peak, which again, in something like strength or in aerobic fitness, is probably somewhere in the mid-30s. From then on, it's fairly well established that there are, step slow declines that occur. Maybe it's 1% every other year, or maybe it's 1% per year that occur as we age. And at some point, physical fitness, whether we're talking about cardiovascular fitness or whether we're talking about strength, that will decline below a certain threshold that is often referred to as the disability threshold. And what that really means is that if your level of strength, for example, dips below a threshold where you're no longer able to get up and down out of a chair, then you're effectively in under the disability threshold, meaning you need the help of a carer, or you need an assistance with walking, or you may use a frame or a wheelchair. And as you say, when people are young and they're, you know, in their 20s, they're not really thinking of this as something as a long-term consequence. But what the models show very nicely is that the greater that capacity that you build early in life, the less likely you are to drop below that disability threshold later in life. So it's almost like you think you build up your ceiling, or you build up your capacity to higher than here. And then when the declines begin to occur, even if they go in parallel, the person who's stronger or fitter early in life is much more likely to stay above that disability threshold later in life. And I suppose the other thing that's related to that is, you know, someone who's involved in exercise training and developing strength or developing fitness, they're more likely to have lots of other good lifestyle habits, you know, diet and sleep and all these other things that we talk about. So I kind of like to say to people, you know, that difference, you know, when we reach our peak, the difference in that peak between two individuals could be, you know, enormous. And then as that is progressed throughout later life, you're seeing very, very different qualities of life, length of life, and so on as people age. And I think that's the thing maybe to bear in mind, is that you've got physical inactivity. There's no doubt that's a threat, but then there's also all these other benefits of activity in terms of the way that it can enhance the quality of our life later in life.
Yeah, because you know the thing is, if you you know, you see, at least, you know, if I think back to school and just you know I don't know, this is not scientific, but just the kids and the friends and the classmates who were more physically engaged in sport, which is they seemed a lot more. I think even the attitude was a lot more better, you know.
Yeah.
It was a lot more lively, if that's even a scientific, not a scientific word, but it just seemed that way. But yeah, and you know, in the 90s, we didn't really, you know, when I used to, you know, take part in track and field, I never really had a trainer. I never went to the gym. I remember the day before running a 400 meter, I got out of the house in jeans and ran, and that was my warm up, and that's all I would do. But it feels, you know, obviously with more information comes a lot more, you know, informed choices, which is great. But I think a couple of things I want to understand is, one is, how important is it to find something which you can do over the course of time? Because, you know, sometimes with, again, coming back to those trends, you know, you do 6 months of CrossFit, the next thing you get an injury because it's not really worked out for you. It's too intense. And then you go really, you're like, oh, you know, that didn't work for me. I'm going to go into, like, you know, jiu-jitsu or do some, and every 6 months you stop because you're injured, then you get back into another form of exercise or martial art or sport. But is it okay to do that, or rather just do something which you can not push to 100%, but you're doing to 60, 70%, but you're doing it for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You're doing it from your 20s to your 60s, your 80s, but you're not getting that significant heart rate going up. You're not getting that significant burst of muscle energy of pushing that in the gym. You know, you see. So yeah, I just want to understand how important is it to keep a sustained exercise sort of program rather than changing it up every 3 months?
Yes, that's a good question. And to answer that, I have to kind of delve into the way that some of these lines of evidence come from within the scientific domain. So a lot of the studies where we look at, say, the benefits of exercise or the benefits of aerobic fitness, and we're looking at long-term effects in terms of cardiovascular health, mortality, and so on, they're done in designs where people are answering questionnaires, or perhaps they're having one fitness test and they're then being followed for you know, many years of follow-up. And in those types of studies, we don't often get a good picture of the intensity that people are working at, or the exact type of exercise that they're doing. It can be hard to get down to the granular detail there. So the other so they're observational studies. And the other way we kind of look at this is where we do so-called intervention studies. And this is where someone will undertake a period of training for 12 weeks or 24 weeks or a year, and different outcomes will be measured from that fitness intervention. And based on the outcomes over that period of time, we then kind of infer the benefits that might be had later in life based on what we see in these other cohorts. So we're kind of merging different lines of evidence when we come up with these recommendations. The reason I say all that is it can become quite difficult to answer very specific questions like you asked there. So could I point to a research study that says, that it's okay to work out for 6 months and then take a break for 6 months and so on. It's very difficult to do those types of studies, but what we can kind of get at is patterns. Like a lot of the studies would say that cardiovascular fitness, for example, is protective as in later life. And so the question might become, what does it take to develop a good cardiovascular fitness? And okay, there's a certain type of intensity of training that's needed there. But another question is what level of activity does it take to maintain cardiovascular fitness as we age? And in that case, the answer actually it doesn't take a huge amount. It's more that you stay active continually as opposed to becoming inactive. And that's how I would kind of answer the question that you've asked there, is that do we need people to be doing extreme forms of exercise for 6 months, getting injured, and then maybe not returning to exercise for 6 months or 9 months? To me, that's not a good pattern. I would much rather see people who are engaged in, fun activities that they enjoy, that make them sweat and make them breathe heavy in a way that lots of different forms of exercise do, and that it's enjoyable and they continue to do it throughout their life. So my own perspective, I've been fortunate from that point of view, and maybe it's a little bit of the bias that I bring, is that I've been involved in team sport for my whole life. So I play a sport called Gaelic football, which is it's similar to soccer, except we use our hands. So it's, for your audience, if they know Australian rules football, it's very similar.
Right.
That. But by being involved in team sport all the time, we're engaged in sprinting activities, we're engaged in moderate intensity activities, we do weight training as part of that, and then all of that is done in a collective group, and it's usually done by someone else doing the training. So I'm sort of fortunate that my activity in my life is all pretty much with other people, designed by someone else. It's all very easy for me to just turn up and train. It's a very, very different thing to try and, for someone who is maybe trying to motivate themselves to do their own training, who's going to a gym by themselves and trying to hit these exercise guidelines. So I appreciate there's an enormous continuum in terms of what types of activities people enjoy, what they're likely to stick to, and what benefits they're likely to derive. But the bigger picture thing is, I think, that to say is that generally you want to be active, I wouldn't say as much as possible, but throughout our life course in as much as that allows, without having to be overly dramatic in terms of following very intense exercise regimes or pushing ourselves too hard to the extent where we pick up injuries and aren't able to exercise. It's finding and I know it's boring to say this, but it's finding moderation, I suppose, in the context of all of the different types of exercise opportunities that are out there.